Hi, I'm Alexis Williams, co-founder of Business Skills for Health Professionals, and welcome to our podcast, Beyond Clinical. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing health professionals from diverse backgrounds who've moved into unconventional roles beyond clinical. We'll be hearing their stories and tips and hope this inspires you to pursue unique career paths. This is episode 18, and I'd like to introduce my guest, Krista Kolodziejzyk. Krista, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Alexis.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you. We have lots of points of connection over both of our careers, but yeah, maybe I'll just share a little bit about your background to start off with. So, Krista is a registered dietitian and the founder of Dietitian Success Center. DSC is a one-stop shop for nutrition, client handouts, and nutrition courses designed by dietitians for dietitians. Krista is on a mission to redefine the landscape for RDs, pushing boundaries in training and practice. She has an MBA in sustainable commerce and an MPH in community nutrition, and has used these skills to build a multi-six-figure dietitian-focused business. She's also dedicated to helping and empowering fellow dietitian entrepreneurs to build thriving, profitable businesses. Krista is an avid baker, reader, and triathlete, and she became a mom in 2023 to her beautiful baby boy, Sunny. Awesome. So great to have you. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks. Me too.
Yeah. So one of my first questions is just like, are there any health and wellness trends that you are excited about right now, or anything kind of fun coming up for you?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because I was, so this morning, because you had sent me these questions and I was thinking about this one in the car and I was
Yeah.
like, I don't really like, I feel like I'm so basic when it comes to my health behaviors that I was like, I don't feel like there's really anything that I've like jumped on lately. However, this is a kind of a funny one that I almost like don't want to admit because it's just hilarious. So, are you familiar with Stanley water bottles?
Yes. I was just
Okay. Yeah.
messaging some friends, like, should I get
Okay,
one? Is
really.
it
Oh,
worth
that's
it?
so funny. Yeah, it's so funny, right? Because I was like, I see all these memes and stuff on Instagram or online about how like, they're just these like massive water bottles and
Yeah.
they're just like so it's such a classic mom move to like have a
Hmm.
Stanley water bottle. And I resisted it for a while. And then if anybody has ever gone through a breastfeeding experience, they
Mm.
know that like the breastfeeding thirst is like nothing
Yes.
you've ever experienced. And so for my birthday this year, I said to my husband, I was like, you know what? I think I gotta go for the Stanley. So anyways, he bought me a Stanley, which honestly, it lives up to the hype. Like
Ooh.
it really has impacted my water consumption. So it's been
Oh,
that's
cool.
that's been my latest wellness trend. And then I think the other thing that I always um which doesn't really relate back to food, but like I'm a big reader and I think
Mm.
reading has such a positive impact on life and mental health and wellness,
Hmm.
whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever that looks like. I like to read for like 5 to 10 minutes before bed every night, and I feel like
Mm.
that helps me sleep better. So those are two
Yeah.
of the practices for me.
I love that. I am also a big reader. I think I follow
Mm.
you on Goodreads.
Oh, yes,
And we actually have a
totally.
lot of
Love Goodreads.
books that
Yeah.
we love. I think I just finished reading one that you read, The
Mm.
Louding Voice. I think it was
Oh,
you that
yes. Girl with the
that was a
Louding
great
Voice.
one. Yeah.
So good. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love books, and I try to read a bit of nonfiction, but I do find it a
Hmm.
little bit harder to
Yeah.
to
Me too.
motivate myself.
Totally. Yeah. 100%.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great wellness habit. So
Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, your career journey.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I did not always know that I wanted to be a dietitian by any means. When I first started out in school, like post-secondary school, I actually thought I wanted to be a writer. And so I went to school my first year for journalism. I was in like a general humanities program and I was thinking, oh, I really want to be a journalist. And then I started there and I think I quickly realized that I didn't want to do that. Like what I thought that was and what it actually was were
Mm.
two very different things. And so at the time, I started to become more interested in food more so. I don't know necessarily about nutrition, but like definitely food. And I
Mm.
started to think about, okay, well, what could a career path look like in that direction? And so coming out of my first year of university, I knew I needed to make a switch. And I was like, hey, I think I maybe want to get into the healthcare space. And so I applied to nursing and I applied to dietetics. And I actually didn't get into nursing, but I think I
Mm.
probably would have gone that direction had I gone in,
Right. Yeah.
which is interesting. So I'm like, thank goodness I didn't get in. And so I ended up going into the nutrition and dietetics world. Um, and so I, went through my undergrad, and as I started learning more about nutrition, I sort of started to gravitate, I think, a little bit more towards the public health, and
Mm.
population health area. I really couldn't see myself in like a really clinical environment. It just didn't feel super aligned for me. I loved thinking more about bigger picture when it comes to health and when it comes to nutrition. And so I ended up from my undergrad doing my master's of public health at the University of Toronto. And while I was doing that program, one of my placements was actually in retail with Loblaw, which is
Mm.
where you and I met, which is
Yes.
just really cool. And I just remember like being so nervous meeting you for the first time. And just like, because you were just like, I mean, I've always looked up to you and I've
Oh,
always loved you as a person. And so, that was a really awesome opportunity. I got to work with some incredible dietitians in that program and then ended up working with you guys after that. And
yeah.
so that was my first, quote unquote, real job as a dietitian. And then I decided to make a switch, and go more into the corporate world. So I worked
Mhm.
for a food company for a little while after that. And reason why that I made that switch is because I've always loved business and the idea of business and the idea of entrepreneurship. And I think, I always sort of say that like one of the best indications of where you should go in terms of your career is like, what are those things that you're genuinely interested in, even if you don't have to be? So like, what are the
Mm.
things that you listen to or read about or research on your own time? Nobody's
Mm.
paying you to do it. You just genuinely are curious about it and you like to learn about it. And for me, that was business and
Mm.
entrepreneurship. And so I would find myself like listening to podcasts. I started my own food blog at the time, and I was getting sort of into that digital marketing world and learning more about that. So I made the switch into corporate, working for a food and beverage company, which was an awesome opportunity just to learn more about the business world and just how
Mhm.
it was such a departure from dietetics as I knew dietetics. And it was like
Mhm.
nutrition and dietetics in a whole different landscape. And so within that role, I was like working with the cross-functional team to actually do product development. So my role was to bring kind of the consumer health and wellness lens to the products that we were innovating on. So, what are consumers looking for in terms of health, in terms of, what's on the nutrition facts table, in terms of what's on the ingredient list, in terms of claims, nutrition claims, like all of those different things. So I did that. And then I also ran with my partner, at the time. Her and I ran the employee wellness
Mm.
for the company too. So that was
Cool.
really fun. Yeah, yeah. Um, and then I still sort of felt this like pull towards entrepreneurship at the time. And I had started my own little kind of side hustles just in different various areas. And I was just really feeling like that entrepreneurship was something that I was just being called to. I was just like, oh man, I couldn't stop listening to podcasts on my
Mm.
commute and dreaming up these ideas and, thinking about these ideas. And so long story short, I ended up leaving my corporate job and starting my own like nutrition freelancing and consulting company. So with that, I was doing things like nutrition writing for companies. So they would hire me to like write evidence-based nutrition content for blogs, for websites. I did some recipe development. I did some recipe nutritional analysis, all sorts of things. I did some social media management for like food brands, all over the map in terms of the different projects that I would take on. But I was basically like a freelancer as a
Mm-hmm.
dietitian. And that was great. I built that up to become a full-time income, and I was working on that, and I did that sort of exclusively for about a year. And around that time, I started Dietitian Success Center, and that was kind of my like side hustle on my side hustle. It was
Right.
like I was now doing full-time freelancing work, and then I started
Mm.
to work on Dietitian Success Center in my, off time. And reason why I started Dietitian Success Center really came back to this challenge that I had as a new dietitian, and that I was hearing across the board with a lot of my colleagues. And it's this idea that, as dietitians, often when we get into practice, we've had internship experience or exposure in very niche placements.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of education is really heavily focused around clinical. And then
Mm-hmm.
you come out of school and you enter the workforce, and suddenly you're often in these environments where you're sort of expected to know a little bit about everything when it
Yeah.
comes to nutrition, right? Like, I could get a patient asking me about PCOS one day and digestive
Mm-hmm.
health the next day, and, picky eating the next day. And there's just there was just so much information to know that I felt like really wasn't covered much in traditional
Mm-hmm.
education. And so, I found myself just spending so much of my own free time trying to find good quality evidence-based information on Google. And it was like, and that would just contribute to such feelings of imposter syndrome when I'm like,
Mm.
wait, but I'm supposed to be the nutrition expert, but yet I'm going to Google to try and find answers to
Yeah.
these questions. You know what I mean? And so that contributed to a lot of just those feelings around imposter syndrome. And, and even thinking about not just obviously your new dietitian, but just your dietitian who is working in any landscape where they're getting asked about any possible
Mm-hmm.
question, but then also things like career changers,
Mm-hmm.
dietitians who have worked for a long time in one setting, and now they're like, hey, I would actually love to start a private practice, or
Mm-hmm.
I want to go into more of an outpatient setting from an inpatient setting. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really where Dietitian Success Center came from, is to solve that problem. And so our objective is really to be the solution to that. We create client handouts, courses on nutrition topics ranging anywhere from digestive health to sports nutrition to PCOS, any of those topics that, you probably didn't learn about in school. And really to be that professional development hub for
Mm-hmm.
dietitians. And so that's where we are today. I've been running Dietitian Success Center full time now for just over 3 years.
Wow. I
Yeah,
am going to ask a question that wasn't in my list of questions,
sure.
but
Yeah.
did you find, because I have some similar experience of like working in corporate and then going into entrepreneurship, did you
Mhm.
find that was beneficial in that you'd learned, like you'd been interested in business and you'd kind of worked in a business setting? Did you find that helpful?
Yes, I think that there were definitely transferable skills. And I think one of the biggest ones, actually, and I feel like I was lucky to have gotten this opportunity in the corporate environment, was I was sort of given the freedom and leeway to be able to execute projects as I wanted
Mm,
to. It was sort of like we would see something that maybe wasn't working well, or there was a project that we thought, hey, this would be really cool. And we just got to do that for the most part,
yeah.
within, and that's really what entrepreneurship is
Mm-hmm.
it's like, deciding on a need or deciding on a project that you feel passionately about and just executing it and sort of
Mm-hmm.
knowing learning how to project manage that yourself.
Mm.
So I think that honestly, that was like one of the biggest transferable skills between corporate and between entrepreneurship
Yeah, I would
for me.
agree. I feel like
Yeah.
there's lots of little things, but definitely
Yeah.
that is a big one because that is
Yeah.
so relevant, and just that broad understanding, maybe some of the concepts of like consumer research and marketing
Yeah.
and, you know, some of those things you
100%.
may have learned
Yes.
about. But
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
any other kind of transferable skills that you've found have served you well throughout the different phases of your career?
Yeah, I mean, just to your point, you had just mentioned marketing and consumer research, and I think that piece too. It's like that whole shift around when you're in an entrepreneurial when you have your own business, you always have to think about like what does the target audience need? What does the
Mm-hmm.
target audience want? What do they need to hear? You always have to put yourself in their shoes. And that was a huge shift in terms of how I thought about things. And especially, this is something that I absolutely learned from the corporate world as we're like, designing products, food products for consumers. You
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure you understand who that consumer is and what
Yeah.
they want and what they need, or else the product's not going to sell. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's having that same attitude and that same mindset when you get into the nutrition world. And it's funny because I think, in dietetic practice, we do think about this when it comes to being client-centered, being client-focused, but
Mm-hmm.
it's taking that concept and it's thinking about it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I agree. There
Yeah.
are a lot of parallels between, like, I often talk about client-centered care and customer
Mm-hmm.
centricity having
Mm.
some overlap, but you're right. It is
Mm-hmm.
kind of taking it to that level and thinking about like, how am I solving the problem that this
Mm-hmm.
group has by either a
Mm-hmm.
product or a service or, you know, some kind of
Yep.
business idea. So yeah, I think that's a great one.
Totally. Yeah.
What do you think helped you with kind of making the leap into business? I mean, obviously you went and pursued an MBA, which I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
was helpful. Do you want to share a little bit about kind of that journey from like the science, public health into more business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, for sure. I think that having an MBA has given me a lot of confidence. I think in
Mhm.
my ability to talk about business and speak about business, but I don't think it's a must by any
Mhm.
means. And I don't know if you share that perspective, but like I think that, a lot of times we feel like as a profession, we're often, I need to get more formal education
Mhm.
in order to do this thing. When in reality, there's so many incredibly valuable, useful tools out there that are totally free that have helped me, just as much.
Mhm.
And I'm talking about podcasts. I'm
Yeah.
talking about books that I've gotten out from the library. Like I'm talking about just learning from other people's experiences. And so, while getting an MBA, I think has paid for itself just in terms of, my own confidence. And definitely, some things that I learned, although I do feel like a lot of MBA programs are more tailored towards people in the corporate
Mhm.
environment, and for me, as someone who was pursuing entrepreneurship, um, there was there was definitely less applicability in some of the courses. I think, I've learned, like I said, sort of just as much from like
Mhm.
podcasts and books, free information that I got off the internet, honestly. Like it's
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, that I think has um those sorts of resources have been really helpful for me in terms of that just transition from more of the science world into the business world. We don't necessarily need more formal education. There's so much information and education out there in the world that if you feel like you are, wanting to pursue a different direction than what maybe you've learned about so far or you've worked in, it's totally possible. It's just about
Hmm.
finding that information out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard that from other people that I've interviewed that have gone the
Yeah.
MBA route. I think it also has a lot of value in the network that you build.
Yeah.
Like the MBA network, I've heard people talk about the benefit of that. But it is a reality that a lot of people who are working in as dietitians or health professionals already have a master's degree. And
Yeah.
I like to talk about the ROI of an
Hmm.
MBA because, that can be a pretty huge investment of time
Yeah.
and dollars. And, you have to kind of look at it like, will I again get the cost back in my
Yeah.
life depending on where I'm going to go. So I think it's
Yeah.
definitely one to kind of think about and look at what else is out there in terms of learning some of
Yeah.
this business knowledge. But
Oh,
yeah, that's
absolutely. For
helpful.
sure.
Yeah, what do you love most about kind of your current role and, being a CEO and entrepreneur?
Yeah. I think one of the things is just having that creative freedom and ability to identify a problem and come up with a solution to it.
Mm,
There's nothing more, I think, fun and fulfilling than having an idea that you're excited about and just being able to see that come to life and spend
hmm
your days doing that. Like that is the funnest thing for me.
hmm
So that is a huge piece. I think another, one of the other things that I really love about the work that we do is actually the ability to support other dietitians. And, so for me, like hiring other dietitians,
hmm
contributing to the livelihood of other dietitians, supporting other dietitians financially with work, with paid projects, that's really
hmm
fulfilling for me too. And that's really meaningful for me because I just have so much belief in our profession. I think that, you know, the I, I've never truly never met more gifted people in terms of, a dietitian's ability um I mean, there's just so many skills that we
hmm
have. And we're generally just like hard working people
hmm
that care about doing really good work.
hmm
And so I love the ability to be able to support others in our profession and just and that's really my goal at the end of the day is to amplify our profession because I think we have so much untapped potential.
hmm
So,
I
yeah.
definitely think we share that vision. I
Mm,
think slightly
yeah,
different angles. Like for me, I
sure.
see there's a lot of opportunity for dietitians to have an impact in the growing sector of health business.
Mhm. Yep.
Whether it be like health tech or, obviously food and food companies, digital health. Like I do think there's a lot by having those transferable skills, like you said, like there's a lot of
Yeah.
broad skills that you have as a dietitian,
Mhm.
especially things like the counseling skills. I find that can
Mhm.
be a really valuable one that can actually really help with things like leadership and just like
Yeah.
figuring out how to work with different people in
Yeah.
different settings. So yeah, I think we share that
Mhm.
same vision in a slightly different way.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What's something that you're working on right now, kind of in your own development? And I want to just preface, like, I know you had a
Mm.
baby recently, and that's
Mhm.
like probably taking up a lot of time. But yeah, is there
Yeah.
anything that's kind of an area of personal growth for you right now?
Yeah, I feel like I'm always working on no matter what sort of happening in life. I think personal development and personal growth is such an important component of, just day to day. And I think that that sort of consistent learning and development has just been something that I've incorporated into my life over the years, whether it be through just listening to a podcast on my morning walk or like an audiobook or like we were talking about earlier, reading.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, one of the things I've been working a lot on is I definitely have a very people-pleasing type tendency. I like to be liked by everyone. Like that is
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm like, I want to be liked by everyone. And I think because of that, it contributes to sometimes a lot of fear when it comes to true visibility and like putting myself out there and
Mm,
having a stance on things. And, I think really just like getting as visible as I want to be,
mm-hmm.
honestly. I think a lot of times my fears around having a different opinion than somebody else or getting criticized or whatever, that stops me from getting DSC visible in the way that I want DSC to be
Mm,
visible. And so that's something that I'm consciously thinking about a lot and working on a lot. But I find that really hard. That's sort of one of
mm-hmm.
my biggest struggles. And I think has always been is just that, yeah, and I know a lot of people share that,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of the fear of being disliked or the fear of, yeah, I think having different opinions than other people, especially in this online world that we live in right now, which can be
Right.
so highly critical and
Mm-hmm.
scary, quite frankly. But I'm not the type of person that wants to live their life in fear. And I
Yeah.
believe in the work we do. I believe in the product that we have. So it's just about how do I align my own courage with
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just getting us out there in the way that
Yeah.
we need to be.
Yeah. It's like, how do you feel ready to be more seen and,
Yeah,
kind of
exactly. Totally.
pull the band-aid off in a few of different
Yeah.
areas? But that's a tough
Yeah.
one. I think a lot of people
Yep.
struggle with that in their
Mm-hmm.
business and in any different setting that they're in, just like that fear and that discomfort with
Mm-hmm.
voicing, like you said, voicing kind of your stance on things. And yeah,
Yep.
definitely a tricky one.
And being okay with like not being the platform for everyone.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
like I need to be okay with the idea that DSC would not be for everyone. And
Right.
that's really hard for me.
Totally. I get that.
You
Yeah.
know, I so yeah, that's kind of I would say that's the biggest thing I'm working on. And then actually another thing we think about a lot is, and we've been talking about as a team a lot, is just around like having more focus. We are a, and by focus, I mean, we have a tendency to create, and we spend our time creating. We're constantly pumping out new content, new resources, new handouts, new courses. And sometimes I think we don't do these pieces of content justice because we don't talk about them enough. We
Mm-hmm.
like create instead of pausing to
Mm-hmm.
promote and
Mm.
to market, And
Yeah.
so that's another thing when I think focus, it's more about sort of slowing down that creation process and instead creating and then taking the time to talk about it, promote it, make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we're doing each, like we'll come up with these incredible toolkits, and it's like there's so much content and amazingness within that, and it's like really need to share this more.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big one too.
I could see the challenge of that in the space that you're in because there are
Mm-hmm.
so many opportunities for new content and,
Yes.
being in so
Oh,
many different, like within the
yes.
nutrition world, like you could specialize in like 100 or more different areas.
Oh
And
yeah,
by
totally.
creating content in a lot of different areas, that would be
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's definitely a need to take the time, talk about it. And that might be
Yeah.
related to the one you just mentioned about like being seen and yeah, who
Mm-hmm.
knows.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
heard something you mentioned recently about more multilingual resources for DSC, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like,
Yeah.
that's a big thing.
Yeah, that's been really fun. So one of the things that we prioritize sort of above all else is like, and when we were talking about being customer centric and customer focused, is like we create based on member need. So like our members, we have a space within our community where people can request content, and we'll just prioritize based on how many times has it been requested. And so
Right.
one of the things that we were seeing requested a lot was Spanish and French handouts. And so we have slowly started to translate all of our handouts into French and Spanish. And so what we're doing is every month we're taking 5 of our most popular English handouts, and we're doing the translation into French and into Spanish, and sort of slowly dripping those out until all of our content is in English, French, and Spanish.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
going to be such a benefit, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Yeah, it's been cool for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so a little bit of a shift. If there's something that you could share with what I say is like your early career self, so when you kind of first got started in your career, if there's something you could share with yourself, what would it be?
Yeah. I think that so I would say there's sort of 2 things. The first thing is like saying yes to opportunities that come your way. Like just saying yes, even if you can't quite see, how this might directly influence the next step in your career. You just never know
Yeah.
what could come of it. And so I think that especially when you're early on in your career, opportunities are so valuable, and just exposure to different people, different environments, different ways of doing things are so incredibly valuable, that I would say, just say yes freely. Unless obviously something feels completely unaligned,
Right.
not
Yeah.
talking about those situations, but I
Yeah.
just mean, when something comes to you and it like maybe feels a little bit scary, it's like, I've never done this before, but I'm interested in it. And I just, say yes and just lean into those opportunities. And then I think the other thing too is not being afraid to invest in your own development. And that can be money, but it can also be just time and energy and bandwidth. It's like, don't be afraid to strive for that next version of yourself. There's a lot of like, and I hate the term self-help, and I feel like a lot of people refer to like books or podcasts in that area as like self-help. It's like, no, I refer to all of that stuff as personal development. It's like,
Right.
what are those books or those podcasts that you can listen to or read that can help you think about things differently and think about yourself differently. And I know for me, like if it hadn't have been for the podcast that I was listening to at the time that were telling me, hey, like you can have your own business if you want to, like if it's something that you really want to do, here's some of the ways that you can get started in that direction. And if it wasn't for those, I think I would still be, I would have definitely struggled more to kind of make that jump, make that leap. So yeah, I think, figuring out a way to sort of work that development into your day-to-day life, whether it be listening to a podcast on your commute or reading for 10 minutes before bed, don't be afraid to invest in yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And I definitely shout out to your podcast. It's definitely been a
Thanks.
source of inspiration for
Oh,
me over the
great.
past few
Awesome.
years of kind of getting back into entrepreneurship. But yeah, do you have any like favorites that you want to mention in that space?
Yeah. And this has kind of shifted for me over time, just sort of
Of
based
course.
on where I am. I remember when I was first starting out, I listened a lot to like Amy Porterfield and Jenna Kutcher, those people. Now I love, so one podcast that I absolutely love is How I Built This.
Oh,
That's
I'm
a
also a big fan.
favorite of mine. I love that podcast. And then I also love the Get Paid podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to
No, I
that
haven't heard of
one
that
with
one.
Claire Pelletreau. Yeah, it's really fascinating. She interviews different business owners about sort of the true ins and outs of their business, and she asks them those questions that like most people are afraid to ask, things
Mm,
like what were your revenues and
right.
what were your expenses? And it really just gives a very realistic picture of business. I think, the more time that goes on, the more I look for and also want to, create just a realistic perspective of the ins and outs of business. And I think, yeah. And so that's what I'm looking for more of. So I feel like those are the two that I
Mm,
that
yeah.
I cling to. Yeah.
That's a great one. I love the
Hmm.
NPR How I Built This as well. It's
Yes.
I just
Yeah.
I've heard all the different stories of so many like companies that you're like, oh, I had no idea how hard it was for
Yeah.
that
They're so
company
fascinating.
to get to where
Yes.
they are. Super cool
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Any final advice for people that are maybe looking at like a career transition, maybe out of like a clinical role into something else, like something unconventional or beyond clinical?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is like you're never stuck, just knowing that you're never stuck. You
Hmm.
aren't. Like at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are just like you who have done things just like you in terms of switching directions and moving into different careers. And so I think finding those people and not being afraid to kind of reach out and ask for help
Hmm.
in making those shifts or in moving in the direction that you see somebody moving in and you're like, that's really cool. That's really interesting. I want to do that. Just reach out to them and
Hmm.
ask to chat with them. I feel like some of the most valuable learnings that I've ever had have been from just having conversations with people. And then, yeah, like if not being afraid to, like I said before, make those investments, whether that's just your bandwidth or whether that's actually investing in a program or whatever to help you get from A to B.
Hmm.
Um, just knowing that if you want to do something, you can do it. It's just about finding those resources and those people that can help you get there.
Yeah, awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. I hope everyone enjoyed hearing from Krista today and
Thank
you're
you.
feeling inspired. Yeah. If you want to engage more with our community, we have our free business skills for health professionals community on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I'll link those in the show notes. And we have
Awesome.
two exciting ways to help you as a health professional. If you are wanting to make that career transition, we have the Beyond Clinical Career Transition Program. And then if you're already working in a non-traditional space outside of clinical, we have a fairly new network and membership that I launched recently. And you can find out more about both of these with the links in the show notes.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Krista.
Thanks, Lexus. It was so good to talk to you.
Yeah. Okay. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks. You too.